Hello, I'm Scott Hammond from INSEAD Communications, and thank you for joining us on this Knowledge Cast with Professor Kevin Kaiser, who is a professor of finance at INSEAD and also the director of the International Executive Program. You have done and are still doing a lot of work that has to do with how companies are owned and ownership issues within companies, how shareholder value is calculated. Could you tell us how you got into this as a finance professor?
Well, the idea of managing for value for me started when I was doing a PhD, trying to understand what value is and how we measure it. It then became more real when I was a consultant for a few years and had to actually help managers to think about it. And then when I returned to INSEAD as a professor to teach about how managers should be and could be managing for value, I came to realize many of them don't really appreciate what we mean by value and value creation and managing for value. And what I mean by that is it's not clear which value we're talking about when we say manage for value. Is it the shareholder value? Is it consumer value? Is it employee value? And even for a shareholder value, there are many different metrics. There's the share price, there's the profit you generate, there's the cash flows expected in the future. So it's not clear to many managers, and indeed maybe to academics, which value we're talking about. So as I started to pursue this, I tried to think about a way to explain why it is that economists try to teach about managing for shareholder value, which is a quite different metric from simply the share price. One of the things that we're looking at, the capital market itself, as the ownership of the world's resources is sort of transitioning from private ownership to the capital markets over the past hundreds of years. The capital markets are a very convenient mechanism, essentially, to transition the world's resources from those who used to own them, which is a very small number of people, to now the billions of us who own them. And as the billions of us take ownership of those resources, any profits left over essentially accrue to us, the shareholders. But us are not, again, we're not the 500 who used to own the world's resources. We're the 1.5 billion, 2 billion people who do. And as we compete to provide the cash to the companies, the result is we're competing the benefits for us away. So that we're getting remarkably poor returns on our investments as shareholders, and the residual now is getting smaller and smaller and smaller to a degree. At the same time, as we've taken control of the resources and ownership of them, we focus the managers much more on making sure they deliver safe, reliable, feature-rich products at low prices. We ensure that they manage their employees responsibly, treat them fairly. We're getting increasingly concerned about the way they manage the planet, the communities, the environment. And so as we've taken ownership of the world's resources over the past 300 or 400 years, indeed the focus of management on how they treat the community, the people, employees, suppliers, consumers, is changing dramatically.
It sounds like you're an optimist when you talk about resources moving from a privileged few to a more democratic distribution.
Yeah.
You seem to be saying we're making progress.
It's fantastic progress. I think somebody pointed out recently the billions of people who've been brought out of poverty through this process in the past few decades alone. It's a process which is only just beginning, I would say. You can refer to it as a democratization of capital. But as we've gotten ownership of the world's resources, we've introduced corporate social responsibility, among many other things. You know, the respect and the treatment of employees is improving. We're increasingly less tolerant of abuse of all manner of employee, from child labor to you name it. And I think the future is looking brighter and brighter. And as we do get control of these resources, we're bringing this mindset not just from our communities and privileged areas of the world, but to China, to India, to Africa. They're going to have to as well start to behave the way we want them to behave.
But to take a slightly more negative point of view, couldn't you consider that as these forces become more global and more powerful, that the ability to do good increases, but so does the ability to do bad? You can destroy the earth now with these activities. One small prince in a little kingdom in the 13th century could not create global warming.
That's
now you
right.
can.
That's right. So the beauty is also the potential peril, right? As we've introduced the technologies for communications, for transportation, for medicine, for education, we've created, you know, technologies that were unfathomable to the world's rich even 100 years ago, even 15 years ago. But at the same time, of course, that brings with it opportunities for abuse as well as positive use. At the same time, as you pointed out, we're democratizing the capital, which means there's fewer and fewer people in a position of control, and we're increasing the checks and balances on those people. We're changing the governance systems of the companies as well as the countries. And as we do that, they're going to be increasingly responsible to us for their misbehavior. Of course, there's always going to be corners of the world, and within any corner of the world, there are always going to be people who are trying to personally benefit at the expense of others. But we're trying, as we get control, to prevent that from happening, if you like. And eventually, in the end game may be nobody has sufficient power, even though as a group we have ultimate power.
When you talk about some of the larger issues about where capitalism is going in the world and how we organize ourselves as a race on this planet, these are things that become pretty removed from your day-to-day behavior in the office. How do you balance a sort of a global perspective with the kinds of things that can make people just more efficient in how they use their day when they come to work?
It's a combination, you could argue, of simply education. Even if it doesn't seem directly applicable to your day-to-day job, it's always great to be able to see the big picture. But at the same time, it's very relevant for people to feel good about what they do in order to be motivated to do their jobs. And to feel you're simply there to create value for somebody else, to make a shareholder rich or to make the boss look good, is not motivating for people. What is motivating is to feel that what you're doing is good for the community, for the other employees, for the consumers who buy your products and services. And so the idea that we're moving towards this beautiful market where all of us own and share the resources of the planet and manage them for our benefit, for the benefit of the communities and the consumers and the employees jointly, but in a very hands-off sort of way, is very important to ensure that people are motivated to go to work and do their job and not simply feel they're benefiting somebody else at their own expense. One of the key themes, of course, in this perspective is integrity. And as you can read in the article, it's a theme which will show up in all of the companies striving to deliver value systematically, and what I call having systems of value-based management. Integrity is something which is needed in order for people to feel positive about the company they work for, and integrity, as I describe it in an organization, is one where it isn't about who knows whom, who gets promoted. It isn't about who lies the best and cheats the best, who gets promoted. It isn't about who politics the best and gets promoted. None of us will feel those systems are fair. We'll feel a system is fair if it's the guys who create the value who get promoted. And all of us are born with a fairness meter inside of us, and we're also born with a value meter. We can tell value creation from value destruction. And in organizations where people who are creating value do get promoted, people who don't face the consequences, people feel that system is fair. And we have examples of our recent trader at Société Générale where the evidence suggests from what I've heard, he felt the system wasn't fair. Certain people went to the right schools. The result is they could access certain positions. Other people didn't go to the right schools. They couldn't, independent of how well they did their job. He didn't consider that fair because he felt some could be creating just as much value even if they didn't go to the right schools. And like any other system, if it's not based on who creates the most value, but instead whose dad is whom, who went to the right school, who politics the best, we won't consider that fair. People will not be motivated, and you're going to have systemic problems.
Kevin, thank you for what necessarily has been an extremely cursory look at some of the work that you're doing. Our listeners who are interested in getting further into the subject can look at the article accompanying it on our Knowledge website. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.